So welcome everyone. We have had just over 400 registrations, 450 registrations for this event. So as I've said, to manage the room effectively, we're asking that you keep your mic muted and your video off and communicate via chat, which many of you have done already. I want to say a huge thank you on behalf of my social enterprise, Rocking Your Teens. Your donations have raised over £100, which will go towards increasing resilience, inspiring and raising aspirations in teenagers. And actually we have an event coming up for International Men's Day in November for teen boys. And so that the funds that you've raised will definitely go directly to supporting that event. If anyone wants to find out more about Rocking Your Teens, please go to rockingyourteens.com, and yours is UR, so rockingyourteens.com. My colleague Snetta will add the URL in the chat for those of you who are interested in finding out more. My name is Jenny Garrett. I'm an award-winning career coach, author and leadership trainer. My books explore the empowerment of working women in leadership roles. And together with my team, we use our years of experience in coaching and leadership to support women and ethnically diverse leaders to progress at work, as well as supporting majority group leaders to make inclusion happen. Our first How to Have Conversations About Race at Work event was such a success that you asked us for a follow-on. In fact, over 600 people registered, and I think we may have broken teams. It just started glitching on us because it just couldn't cope with the pressure. So of course we were happy to oblige when you asked us for a part 2. For those who missed it, my colleague Snetta will at some point add a link in the chat so that you can watch it back later. But what did we discuss? Well, we discussed how to develop the right vocabulary and language to discuss race with your colleagues. We discussed what the pitfalls were to avoid and the mindset you need to approach talking about race at work. And today we're going to dive just that little bit deeper. As I said, we are recording this session, but what you say will, what you write in the chat will not be recorded. And as you're not able to unmute yourself or open your video, you won't be seen on the video either. As always with our sessions, I encourage you to adopt a beginner mind in which you're open to learning from each other. None of us are perfect. We're all capable of saying the wrong thing sometimes, but let's be kind and forgiving and assume that we all have positive intentions here. So I'm hoping we can all agree to that. And that stretches to what's written in the chat as well. Someone might write something that you might not agree with. That's okay. Let's be open and curious to understand where each other are coming from. So during this session, experienced executive coaches, Claudia Crawley, Sadia Salam and Marie Loney, all listed in the Diverse Coaching Directory, a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches from Black, Asian and minority backgrounds. We'll discuss approaches that you can take as a white leader to support your colleagues. My colleague Snetta is going to put in the chat a link to the directory. And it's a really exciting time for this directory because we're finding organizations, and when in terms of their pool of coaches, do not have a diverse group of coaches to offer to their colleagues. And so this might be an opportunity for you to at least introduce this directory into your organization so that you all get the coaches that you deserve. The process for today, Claudia, Sadia and Marie will briefly introduce themselves, and I'll start off by asking them some questions, and then we'll open it up for you for your questions and reflections. And Snetta and myself will keep an eye on the chat throughout. For those of you who love social media like I do, there's a hashtag for this event, Race at Work, and Snetta will put all of our handles, I think they're called, in the chat so that you can tag us on Twitter, and you can find us all on LinkedIn as well. For those of you who've been part of our events before, you know that I love a poll. So we're going to start with a poll, just understanding your job title. Are you a senior leader? Are you in human resources? Are you a diversity, equity and inclusion professional? Are you a line manager, an aspiring leader, or are you a founder or entrepreneur? Let us know. So there are 209 of you on at the moment and still growing, still people arriving. Just about 50% of you now have completed the poll. Let's see. I tried to get to 80–90% before I close the poll. So the numbers are growing, 66% of you so far. Let's see if we can get to 80%. I know sometimes when you're joining from your phone, it can be difficult to see the poll, but hopefully most of you are on a laptop or a computer. Someone's asked for us to enable transcription, which I have just done. So you'll be able to access transcription if you want to. Apologies for not putting that on earlier. Thank you for the prompt. Okay, 83% of you now have completed the poll. So I'm going to end it and just let you know who's in the room. So we have, as the highest number, 32% of you are line managers, 26% are aspiring leaders, and 16% of you are senior leaders. Then we have followed by some diversity, equity, inclusion professionals, and then some human resources people, and finally some founders and entrepreneurs. So I hope you can see that. Great to see the mix of people in the room, and great that we've got lots of leaders, because these conversations that we're talking about would be great to be had by leaders. It'd be great if leaders were having conversations about race at work and being great role models. Question for those who came along to our last event. If you did, have you had a conversation about race at work since? It would be really great to hear that. So be lovely to know if that our event spurred you into action and gave you the courage or the insight or the knowledge that you need to have those kinds of conversations. So let's see. Fabulous. Let's keep going. Not everyone I know would have attended the last event, but let's see. I'll just give it a few seconds longer. Lovely. I think we've come to a natural stop there. So if you attended the last event, it looks like 79% of you have had conversations about race at work since. So I think that's fantastic. 8 out of 10 of you. Do you remember those adverts? 8 out of 10 cats prefer it. I think it was a Whiskers advert. So 8 out of 10 is a really, really good amount. So we're pleased to hear that. And hopefully the 20% of you who maybe haven't had that conversation will do now, will do as a result of attending today's event. So thank you very much for completing those polls. It's just always good to get your interaction, hear where you're at, and also know who we're speaking to. So it would be great now. Let's get introductions from our wonderful panelists. I'll start with you, Claudia. Please do introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claudia Crawley. My business is called Winning Pathways Coaching, and I'm an author. I'm in the process of finishing my 4th book. I'm also an award-winning mentor, an executive and career coach, and I specialise in working with women social workers, but I'm not exclusive. And since the death of George Floyd, I've been doing a lot of coaching with Black women facing challenges at work. My professional career started in probation, then I moved into social work, and I got made redundant in 2010, and that's when I set up my business. On top of all of that, I've got 25+ years experience of anti-racist activism and training, and I recently broke free of London and escaped to the country. So that's me.
Broke free. Okay, thank you so much, Claudia. And Sadia.
Good morning. Good to be here. I'm Sadia Salam. I'm a coach, an inclusion facilitator, and a recovering lawyer. So I did start life as a lawyer 20 odd years ago, and I did that for 20 odd years, both in private practice and for corporates. And I now spend all my time with amazing women who are at a crossroads in their careers or feeling stuck in their careers, and helping them get unstuck and lead in the way that's truly authentic for them. As an inclusion facilitator, I help organizations have the courageous conversations they want to have but find it difficult to have, to really help create that inclusive culture and help people feel that they belong. I'm Welsh, I'm Bangladeshi origin, and having grown up in Wales, I now live in London with my husband and 2 children.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Sadia. And last but not least, Marie.
I just remember to unmute myself before I start talking. Hi everyone, I'm Marie Loney. Thank you, Jenny. I have a creative background. I started in the fashion industry. Sorry, I hope you can't hear the background noise there. And I am an executive well-being coach. So I support businesses develop well-being in their organizations. I worked in a very extremely pressurized environment, the fashion industry, which actually most industries are quite pressurized these days. And I supported professionals and businesses develop well-being cultures so that in their organizations, it would help to increase productivity and decrease absenteeism. I found that in my own business, in the fashion industry, life was fabulous, was really creative, but that came at a price to my mental health and also my well-being. So it was fabulous being creative and it was really exciting, but the price of that environment was burnout. So for me, I wanted to work with organizations to help them nurture a well-being culture through strategies, initiatives and policies so that they could create safe conditions for all their employees to have a healthier work-life balance. So that will actually impact positively on their organization.
Wonderful, thank you. As you can see, our panelists bring a wealth of experience and also a wealth of perspectives. And during this session, you'll see that we maybe won't always agree with each other, but I think that really makes for a richer discussion, and you'll have your own perspectives to add into the mix as well. So let's get into it. You know, when we're talking about conversations about race at work, we also need to just clarify what we're talking about here. What are the key differences when we're talking about race and when we're talking about racism at work? And I'm going to start with you, Claudia. You know, what do you see as those key differences when you're talking about race and when you're talking about racism?
Right. I think this is a really good question, because one of the things I've noticed is that people often get the 2 terms mixed up and they talk about race and racism as if they're the same thing, but actually they're not. They are closely related, but I'm just going to say very briefly what the difference is between them and then talk about how talking about them, what the difference is. So race is actually, it's a socially engineered concept. And it was invented as a means of highlighting the differences between people and classifying one group as superior to all the others. But there's absolutely no biological or psychological evidence to support that concept of superiority. And despite this myth, it has widely influenced our discourse and how we think about the differences between people, because we see it very much in terms of race, based on physical characteristics. But actually, there's only one race, and that's the human race. So conversations about race at work is very much about the differences in terms of identity, ethnicity, and culture, but also the experience that we each encounter and the perceptions we have as a result of those differences. So, for example, a conversation about how a Black person felt about the death of George Floyd, that's very much a conversation about race. So when we talk about racism, this racism was born out of the concept of race and the myth of white superiority. Now, a definition, the one I particularly like, is in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And what it said is that racism is a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Now I'm quoting, and then it states that the systemic oppression of a racial group for the social, economic and political advantage of another is also racism. So the two the two definitions combined give us what racism is all about. So talking about racism is talking about the act of oppression, such as police stop and searching black guys disproportionately. So basically, I think of them in terms of race being the theory and racism the practice.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. It was a very comprehensive definition there that we can all build on. Marie, what about your perspective on that?
So thank you, Claudia. That was very comprehensive. So I would like to think about race and racism in terms of experiences. So what Claudia was saying there in terms of race, for me, it's about ethnicity and about culture. And I'm feeling that I want to celebrate that because I'm really proud of my background, where I come from. It's a part of who I am. It's really interesting. And I'm really interested about learning about different cultures and different peoples. I find it quite fascinating. That might be the creative side of me. But that also conjures up really positive emotions in me. So that I want to celebrate that. When it comes to discussing something like racism, even just hearing the definition starts to really, put my back up. My emotions turn to a sort of a defensive side or a fierce side, because the experiences that I've had that are associated to the racism have been negative. So that's how I feel about, and that's how I define it. I define it in a more negative term. So it's those kind of actions and that kind of terminology. Now, Imoja Ola, who is the author of So You Want to Talk About Race, actually discusses language, the language that why we really reticent to talk about racism, because we haven't really developed the language for it yet, because we all have different experiences as people of color around racism. So we all come to the table with, different ideas or different fears or, just difference. And we have to start to have conversations like this so we could start to formulate some sort of terminology that works for us all. And then together we can start to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that insight into how we feel and tapping into that. And Sadia, do you want to say more and build on that?
Yeah, I agree. I always start with a definition and it's important for me for them to be different, because I don't think I'd start a conversation if I had racism in the back of my mind. When I've got race in the back of my mind, I will have a conversation. And when I talk to many clients and people, they will stop and not have a conversation about race because they're worried about the racism topic coming up. So it's really important, because I agree with Marie, there's a brightness with race when you talk about it, there's curiosity, it's collaborative, but there's a real denseness and heaviness when you talk about racism. And we can get past that. So if people start a conversation about race, because we should, and it's a good conversation to have, and somebody brings in racism, you can always say, oh, I think there's a difference between race and racism. And I love talking about race, but I'm finding the racism thing, racism conversation heavy. If it does come up and you don't want to talk about it, you can always choose not to, because they are different and there's a choice. But I would never stop talking about race because you're worried about the racism topic coming up. And that's why it's good to understand the two different definitions that Claudia aced us with.
Yeah, I also think though, I'm listening to all of you and I completely agree. And I'd like to add that sometimes the beginning of a conversation about race does lead to the sharing of experiences of racism. And also that can be quite important. So it can open the doors for you to recognize me and see me fully as a person. Then my full experience might be shared, and some of my full experience might be that I've experienced racism. So it can open the door to discuss that, but it's not what you open the door with. Maybe that's how I'm viewing it.
And I think when you open the door and you talk about racism as your experience, it's for the other person just to listen. There's nothing to fix in that conversation, because often when people think you bring up racism, you immediately have to fix something, or you have to apologize, or you have to do something. And yes, you can, but also you can just listen, because somebody's just telling you about their experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. And listening is active. Listening is an action in this sense. Thank you. So my next question for you, what strategies help to build trust and ensure that there is clarity around your motivations when approaching conversations about race? And actually, I'm going to start with Sadia this time.
Sure. So I've had a journey with this one. I didn't start my journey in work just talking about race. So when I qualified as a lawyer in, I don't know, 2000, I didn't immediately talk about race. In fact, I avoided it. I actively avoided it for the majority of my career because I didn't want to. So it's something I had to learn. And how I learned that was actually experiencing a safe environment to talk about it, to build that trust, because we need to build trust. And it was from people asking me questions and from me listening to them talk about race. That's how I started. And then I started talking about it. And I talked about it because I wanted to, because I realized that by talking about it, by hearing other people talk about it, it just felt so good and it made me want to open up. And that was my vision. It was actually by talking about race, I open up and I'm seeing other people open up in ways they've never opened up before. And they look more at home. They're not looking as stiff. And I worked in a law firm, so there's a lot of people that look stiff in the law firm. They weren't, they were kind of lighter. And there was this lightness that made me feel lighter. And I really enjoyed that. So that was my reason for wanting to talk about race. And I mentioned it every time I talked about race. And I took small steps. So I actually talked about it with friends first, saying, does this sound a bit weird? You know, I'm kind of opening up and telling people about this. Does this sound a bit weird? And I remember my friend was going, no, clearly not, that's you. Oh, right, okay, so then I started. So I started small. I started with practicing with friends, talking about it and taking small steps. That's what really helped me, was knowing why I wanted to talk about it and knowing that when I talked about it, I was just doing it because I really wanted to. And I wasn't expecting anybody else. I invited people to talk if they wanted to, but if they didn't, that was okay.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I'll go to you next, Marie.
Great, thank you for that, Sadia. That, yeah, exactly that. I just agree totally with Sadia and what she's saying there. And it does happen. You have to create a space, a safe space, a psychological safe space where everyone can feel like they can contribute, they can challenge, they can actually be included in the conversation as well. So for me, it's about it's about having some conversations around what does that actually look like? Shall we have some verbal agreements about before we have discussions about that? Sure, of course, if you're just speaking to somebody off the cuff, there's, you know, it's not about, you could, it's very difficult to start having verbal agreements there, but you could start to frame your language and frame the conversation so people understand what's acceptable and what the boundaries are and what aren't acceptable in that space. More often than not, somebody who is in a senior position, if they start to discuss these issues, then they are showing their vulnerability, their openness, their authenticity, and that gives permission for others to actually do that. And I think that has to actually play a very important part in this conversation, because these relationships and these conversations, they develop over time, but everyone needs to feel really safe to contribute and challenge and actually not feel embarrassed or marginalized or punished in any way when they do.
Thank you. Yeah, some really good points. I hope some people are taking notes out there. If you're not aware of that idea of psychological safety, if you're not thinking about some of these points, they really do help you so you don't fall into making some of the mistakes that can set you back. Claudia, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's such a loaded, as Sadia said earlier, racism, it's such a they're loaded terms, and people are really scared of talking about them because we can get triggered. And so I think having a strategy is a good idea. And what I would say really is that you need to be clear about why you're starting a conversation about race. That's the first thing. The second thing is to be clear about your terms. because the language, we think we're talking about the same thing and often we're not. And when that happens, it leads to misunderstanding and sometimes conflict. So, which, you know, kind of add to the triggering of the whole experience. And remember that to get trust, it starts with rapport. And you can build rapport when both sides know what they have in common. So I would find out about commonalities and share, because it's the commonalities that tend to unite us. And know that trust takes time as well. So conversation should be continuous. The other thing is that be respectful, be positive, and actually leave people feeling okay. You don't want to end on a note of conflict. And also do your best to contribute to making it a safe space for people to talk. So that's what I would say in terms of building a strategy.
Yeah, absolutely agree with all of you. As coaches, we have to build rapport quickly with people all of the time. We meet someone, they may have been allocated to us as a client, or they might be choosing us, and we have to sort of develop chemistry. You know, one of the things that in terms of a book I read quite early on in my coaching career was this idea of self-disclosure, of sharing a little bit of yourself in order for the other person to share a bit of themselves. So you know, if someone came to me and said, you know, I want to have a conversation with you that I haven't had before, we've been working together for 20 years, I've never asked you anything about your heritage, but I personally feel quite nervous about asking you, but I'm really curious and I'm really interested. That element of disclosure would really help me connect with them, rather than someone who's coming in and totally polished and pretending that they know it all. So think about that. What is it that you would disclose that would help you connect in order for you to build that trust and be able to have that conversation? Of course, always be genuine. I'm not talking about inauthenticity here. It's about how, you know, be real with people. That's what people want, real humanity. We're going on to the last question that I want to ask the panelists here, these fabulous coaches. So do start putting your questions in the chat. I can see there's been lots of conversation. Apologies, I didn't put the title social worker in the poll. I will next time, because there are lots of you, or I'll put other so that no one feels left out, because after all, the idea is to be inclusive. So my final question is, how can you overcome your fear of getting it wrong in order to take the first step, having that conversation about race? And this time I'm going to start with Marie.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, fear is a difficult one. There's so many levels, and yeah, I think you just have to be courageous, and you really just have to go for it. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Not all fear is bad fear. Some fear actually prompts us to do things. There's a book, Susan Jeffers, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I think that's a really good place to start, and just keep that in your mindset. Develop those kind of trusting and safe relationships. Be respectful and supportive in those environments as well. Having this kind of conversation about race, you know, is about listening, and that's listening without judgment, and taking time to actually reflect on what's happening there. So you have to be careful about your words, but not so careful that you don't say anything. And sort of don't replace your fear, don't replace your curiosity with fear, because that's, you know, that's kind of not going to be a really good place for you to be. So there's an uncomfortable situation. It's a real uncomfortable situation, and that's going to make you fearful. So it's about actually being comfortable with the uncomfortable. You're going to be juggling lots of different levels of discomfort and challenges, as well as human dynamics, because everyone's coming with different kind of experiences. So kind of be open to feeling that discomfort, and then push yourself to actually communicate as candidly and as authentically as you can about these kind of difficult topics that you might have, and accept that you don't know everything, accept that you're not perfect. Apologize when you make a mistake and there's a blind spot that you don't know about. Go away, learn about it. Be grateful, express gratitude when somebody actually says something that's very personal to them. And when you're listening, that active listening, that deep listening, try and be, sort of engrossed in that. Try and, be supportive in that, because people are actually expressing some injuries that they might have, that they want to, that's a very special place for them. So then, after you've done that, pick yourself up, start again and try and do better next time. It's about trying to continually do something and stepping into that space so that you become more familiar with it. And then the discomfort won't be so bad.
Wonderful, thank you. It just reminds me of something that I write in something I deliver, which is to say, I appreciate your patience with me. I'm probably going to get this wrong, but you can help me on this journey. Actually just being open in that way, I think can be really, just, I appreciate your patience, recognize that I will get this wrong, but I am on a journey, and if you can help me, we can do this together. And I think it's that help to walk alongside someone rather than expect the other person to do the work for you, which I think is important. Lovely. Sadia, your thoughts on this? How can you overcome the fear of getting it wrong?
I think the fear of getting it wrong is always going to be there, just as Marie said, and it's getting how you get comfortable with that. How I get comfortable with that is when I've got the fear of getting something wrong, I've always got the what ifs in my mind. What if I offend someone? What if I upset someone? What if I make everybody think that I'm a terrible person? We've all got those what ifs. And if you face that fear, you can face it by just saying, well, what if I get this right? What if I make someone feel that they belong? What if I open the door for an organization that everybody can turn up and talk about anything they want to talk about? So always flip your what ifs and the real fear, and face that fear. And I also think organizations can do something. I think we always have to, it's number one, we've got to face our own fears and do it anyway, and choose courage over fear. That's our choice. Be brave or be fearful. That's the choice. So that's number one. But number two, I think organizations can do things about fear, because we all know there is fear around talking about race. That's a given. Every single organization, because we're all human beings. And having internal panel discussions where just titled how to talk about race. Having things above photocopy machines with how to talk about race, and somebody within the organization talking about their race. You can break fear through just seeing courage out there and having examples of where people have stepped past fear and said, I've stepped past fear.
Lovely, thank you very much. Brilliant tips there. And Claudia, love your thoughts as well. You're muted at the moment.
Sorry, I'll mute again. I agree with everything that's just been said, but I'm just going to build on it with a couple of things that haven't been mentioned. When we start to feel afraid, actually looking at that fear realistically and finding out what it's all about really helps. So, if it's the fear of getting it wrong, you fear making mistakes, maybe you've done it in the past, just get a strategy together that's going to help you to deal with that mistake, so that when it happens again, you're going to come out of it okay. And the strategy I've developed is called the 5 A's. So the first thing is to apologize. The second thing is to appreciate why it was a mistake and what to do next time. And you can get that appreciation by actually asking the other person for some clarity on why what you said or did was a mistake. And then advance. What I mean by that is to actually move on from the experience. Don't allow it to get you stuck. And then the fifth one is apply your learning, and put it into practice next time it happens. Actually, that's the 4 A's, not the 5 A's. And just remember that mistakes are good, because they bring learning. Welcome them. That's how you learn. And something Maya Angelou said, which a quote of hers, which I really liked, and she said, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. So don't allow those mistakes to stop you. And if it's a fear, if your fear is about being accused of being racist, just think about what's worse. you know, is this the worst that could ever happen? Is it so bad that it's going to stop me? And just be clear that you aren't alone in this, because there are people like me who've had 25 plus years experience of working in this field who still have fear about being accused of getting it wrong, saying the wrong thing, behaving in the wrong way. So you're actually in good company, because there's a lot of people out there who feel this fear. The other thing is to prepare and practice beforehand. Prepare and practice asking those questions, having those conversations. You'll get better at it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just checking in, any other last thoughts from Marie, if you had anything more on the sort of organizational things that organizations can do, or anyone else, because I am just while we go to those next questions, was there anything else you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I could, you know, it starts from the top, really. It starts with maybe a mission statement. It starts with some policy. It starts with that filtering down into the organization. And it's modeling. It's about the senior managers modeling so that the culture starts to develop, and it gives permission for everyone else to actually be open and be vulnerable and have those conversations.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So we have a question here. With the definitions you gave about talking about race positive and racism negative, it's great to share your ethnicity, culture, and sensibilities with others who identify with their ethnicity. What is your experience of such conversations with white people who don't engage with this? And so race conversations quickly shift to racism. Can you reflect on this dynamic? So, you know, this idea that race for us is something to be very proud of, and racism is something that we know is negative. But for white people, maybe they haven't quite connected with that idea of race for them. And so, yeah, what could you do? Because that conversation then quickly focuses on racist or being race or racism. Any ideas on that?
I could add something.
Great.
You have to start baby steps. You have to start with some sort of communication, because it's about starting the conversation and keeping it going. And it might be just a small step to start with. It might be, I went to see, you know, a concert the other day or an exhibition the other day, and this was what it was about. And that person might not necessarily be interested in what, you know, your ethnicity, but they might be interested in the museum and what you went to see and why you went to see it. So you start with those kind of conversations, and those conversations could get deeper and deeper and deeper. And as you build a relationship with that person, then I'm believing that going forward, they'll be more interested to hear about your experiences, which maybe, you know, would have stronger kind of content to it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, really, really great points. Would anyone want to add to that? Sadia.
Sure, and that's definitely happened to me. And I think sometimes it's why you're having that conversation. Come back to that why, because if you start talking randomly about race, when somebody's got their head down in a document, I remember speaking with a partner and his head down was in a document. He was all focused on what we're going to talk about in that meeting. So if you then start talking about race, they're kind of, you know, what's going on here? So it depends. So sometimes you're catching people off guard, and that's why sometimes they're like, I just don't want to talk about anything other than this particular topic right now. And then I've left that in the past. It's kind of just left it. Sometimes when you are talking about race related and they don't want to talk about it, sometimes I've said, oh, have I offended you? Or are you okay? How are you feeling? And that they open up going, I've never spoken about this before, and I don't really know what to say, and I might offend. I've had that in response. And then then we start talking about that. I think some people need some steps before they can openly talk about race. Another thing, I was actually on holiday, we were on holiday on Scotland, and it came up in conversation, and I started talking about race and things, and he kind of looked at me a bit oddly. And then I explained them because when my parents first came over here in 1967, they were in Glasgow, and I kind of explained why I was talking about it because I hadn't before. And then we started talking about work ethics and hard work. And then he clicked, and then he was all over the conversation because we're talking about hard work and work ethics. So it's like Marie said, sometimes I had to do a bit of digging to find that commonality. But it was worth it because then we had a great conversation. And for me, it's always not leaving them with the, I never want to talk about race ever again. That's always in my mind, rather than how I started. It's like, I just want them to know that it's okay to talk about race, and actually to not talk about race, because that's for them okay. They're on their journey.
Yeah, I definitely think this is probably what it's like. So if I was a goldfish in a bowl of water living around, I would never think about water. It's only if you take me out of the water that I realize water is all around me. And I think that if you are in the majority group and everything is kind of designed for you as a white man, for example, although it might not feel like that, but the truth is most things are designed with a white man in mind, then you don't think about race, because why would you have to? Unless someone puts you in an environment where suddenly you experience yourself as different, is only when you become quite connected with it. And so it does take, I think, a really good exercise to do is to just think about a time. Maybe you went on holiday, maybe you went to a religious occasion for, that was a different religion to you, or, some sort of ceremony or experience where you felt, actually, I am different here. And think about, well, actually, for many people from ethnically diverse groups, they might feel like that for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and start to then think, well, actually, that means there is something, being white, there is something about whiteness, there is something about being black, brown, however you want to use these terms. And I think actually there is something about connecting white people with that knowing of who they are, rather than thinking that the whole world is like that, like a goldfish thinks that water is everywhere because that's what they're in. So I would challenge you to encourage your colleagues to just think about that experience, even just think about a time where they felt different and what was going on there, and help them get in touch with understanding their own difference. And I think that will lead to some really rich conversations. So that's a starting exercise. Lovely. So we did have I've got so many questions coming through. I'm just going to find one. I think it was, what happens if the top just isn't getting it? Even where grassroots staff are developing action plans, mission statements, and proposals, and where process blocks action. So yeah, what happens when the people at the top, if we're saying it starts at the top and the people at the top don't get it, what do you do? Any ideas, suggestions on this one? Claudia.
Yeah, there's power in the collective. That's what I would say. I think you need to join with like-minded people who share your values and who share your enthusiasm for getting this on the agenda and for opening this conversation about race within the organisation. And they will be there. You just need to find them, start talking. Because when as a collective you can approach the people at the top, then they're going to be forced into taking some kind of action.
Fabulous. Thank you. Anything else, Marie?
Yeah, I think it's about also looking at what the responsibilities of organisations are to their employees. So if there are policies, government policies, organisational policies that need to be adhered to, that's about inclusivity and diversity, then those are topics that can be brought to the forefront and laid on the table, and discussions start to happen. And that can then form other discussions around how to talk about race in the workplace. So I think that's really somewhere to start as well.
And Sadia, do you want to say anything here?
Yeah, I think it happens a lot, and I don't think it's unusual, unfortunately. But I also like to add the yet in. So the top level haven't got it yet, but it is a matter of time now because clients have got it. And if the clients have got it, you can, they will change because they want to retain, every business has clients and they want to retain those clients. And I'm seeing that a lot, the clients are pushing them. So I would agree with Claudia that there's power in the collective within, but also there's power externally now as well. So it is going to happen. So don't lose faith, keep going. The senior leadership will change, they have to. And that is happening. Some are just taking a bit longer than others. But if you're seeing things happen with clients, make sure you show your senior leadership, because if clients are doing it, they're going to be asking their senior leaders from their suppliers very soon.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The pressure is coming in many different directions. And I think it is about, sadly, sometimes just finding what the leverage is. Sometimes it's the business case. Sometimes it's about customers and not being cancelled. Sometimes it takes a big issue to happen for people to connect. But ultimately, for me, this is about fairness and justice. And I think we should all want that. And I think people want that for themselves. And I think finding a way to help people understand that and think, actually, if I was in a position where I wasn't being given promotion, or my children weren't getting a promotion or getting opportunities for no good reason, actually, that's so unfair, and that we need to level up and make sure that doesn't happen, for fairness and justice, and then for productivity and creativity and innovation. And there's lots out there. We always share links when we send video recordings after the sessions, and we share McKinsey's report, and there's so many evidence reports now of the difference diversity makes. But I think it's not just the mind, it's connecting the heart as well. And I think when you get both of those, that's when real change happens. I would also, they will be shown up by other great leaders now. The big organizations are putting targets in, they're making big commitments, and they're understanding that actually this really matters, trying to get to the heart of it. So not just, oh, we've got a target to, for a percentage of people from Black, Asian and minority backgrounds in senior leadership, but we also are making connections with organizations. We actually are getting diverse suppliers. We're doing it on multiple levels. And I think if you start showing best practice from competition, that's another thing that can really ignite your top leaders. Yeah, we should really want them to do, they should just want to, but we are actually all busy people, and people choose what to prioritize, sadly, even though this should be embedded in everything that's done. So we've got a question which was about anti-racist people being employed. I'm just going to try and find it. It was sort of this idea that lots of roles are being recruited for, because I think that diversity and inclusion roles are one of the top growing fields right now. So this idea that these roles are being recruited to, but ultimately they're not really doing that work. What they're doing is a lot of sort of HR process work. I just wondered if anyone has any reflections on that.
Yes, I do understand there are copious amounts of roles that are being advertised in diversity and inclusivity and equality. The names are changing all the time. And I think that it's just like the whole thing before George Floyd, there was an issue about race and racism, etc. But there were certain things that happened, and it was the right moment for everyone to really understand the depth of the situation and what needed to happen. And I think with these roles, it's the same thing. There's going to come a time, and it's going to take time for people to realize what these roles really mean and what they have to be, what the roles are defined as. And I think that organizations, as Sadia was saying, external pressures will help people to formulate that. And as also you were saying, Jenny, about competition will help people define that. So it's going to be kind of a natural storm that's actually going to happen and evolve, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of my concerns is that organizations sometimes are creating roles and expecting that role to fix fix everything. And that's absolutely not what it's about. You can recruit to a role, but you have to embed this work in everything that you do. It should be, within it, not outside of it. So I think you should, if anyone's creating these roles in your organization, you should really feed into, what does this role do? What are we expecting? What team do they need? What budget do they need? Or are we just recruiting something so we can say we've done it? And I think it's about it being strategically thought about and being part of a wider strategy, and recognizing the work that needs to be done is not a little bit of tweaking of some HR processes, but actually it's about cultural change. It's a lot of work that needs to be done, and a lot of initiatives in conjunction with each other. So I think it's helping your organization to look at it in those terms. So there's a question here. The terms about race like BME, BAME, people of colour are always liked and equally disliked, as in terms of sexuality, mental health, disabilities, etc. I would ask the other person what they prefer. If you are talking to a big group, acknowledge that there are many terms and you are going to use one for practical reasons. Okay, so I think this person is just making a suggestion. It's not really a question. And I think that's a really good strategy. Someone also has put this point, which is, what is the point of having your conversation about race? And I think that's a good question to be thinking about. Why are we, we're saying how to have conversations about race at work, but why would you be having them? Yeah, just any just quick thoughts on that.
I don't quite get the question, Jenny. Could you
yeah, well, our talk today is on how to have conversations about race, but why should we be having them in the first place?
Okay. I think what I would say is that if we're not having conversations about race, there's a whole group of people who you're not acknowledging their existence, because they are there. They're not. Personally speaking, as a Black woman, I will only talk about my experiences, things like my hair being different, for example, when people ask, because my experience historically and even now is that because a lot of people don't realize that our perception of the world is totally different from a white person's perception. So when I've talked about my hair in the past, people have seen it as, why do you keep talking about your hair? They don't realize that Black people do talk about their hair a lot. It's a big deal for us. So the responses I've received from people when I have chosen to talk about myself as a Black woman has been dismissive, undermining. So I don't openly talk about myself in that way anymore. So the point I'm making really is that you're actually missing out. You're missing out on the people who are working in your organization and you don't know them. You don't know about their lives. You don't know who they are. And you cannot make that assumption that they are like you, because they're not. Their experiences and their perception of the world is just totally different. I think that's why conversations about race are so important. And when you understand the people who you're working alongside, you will understand your customers, and you'll deliver a better service, I guarantee you, because you can then take on board their experiences, because you know that the people in your organization who are like them are having a similar experience, similar life experience. They see the world in a similar way. But that's why I think it's important.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a point that someone made, which is they were asked to be on a panel as a Black person, and someone who was white said, well, why have you been asked to be on the panel? I should be on there. And because they wanted a diverse panel, and the person felt very uncomfortable with the way the person said, why are you getting that opportunity? What I'd say to that is, when you've been in a position where you get opportunities all the time, as soon as we start to level the playing field, it feels like disadvantage. but all it is leveling the playing field. Now you can explain that to someone, but they still might not get it. And I think it's for you to understand that they might feel like that, because what's happening is they've been here, you've been here, and now we're leveling it up. For them, it might feel like they're going down, but they're not. And this is part of the growing pains of change. And really not for you to take on or deal with, to be honest, because you were chosen and you know why you're part of that panel. And as a result, that panel's going to be better. So I think sometimes we have to just hold in our mind what the mission is and what the intention is and know it for ourselves, while other people might have to be catching up. So the time is moving so quickly. I really want to just leave everyone with a final question that comes from us. We're all coaches, and so we love to ask good questions. And so I'd like to ask you, panelists, what's the big coaching question that you think will drive individuals who are part of this conversation today to take action on having conversations on race? What big coaching questions should they be asking themselves to really move past fear, to motivate themselves, to drive action in this space? And I'm going to start with Claudia.
Yeah, my coaching question would be, there's two actually, there's always two. So what have I got to lose by having conversations about race? And what have I got to gain? And if I can just throw something in very quickly as a resource, I would recommend that you go and have a look at Lloyd Banking Group website. They are doing some amazing things to actually open up that conversation about race and to bring about change within that organization. So definitely Lloyd Banking Group, go and have a look at what they're doing.
Fabulous, thank you. Marie?
Sorry. So my coaching question would be, what would it look like if I pursued challenging opportunities? So if I keep on pursuing these challenging opportunities, I will be learning, the people around me will be learning, and I'm believing that's going to lead to a better environment and safer environment that you work in. And also, what can I do to cultivate perseverance within me so that I can actually reach my goals? Because if you can keep on going, dust yourself off, pick yourself up and keep on going, you will reach your goal at the end of the day.
Fabulous, fabulous. And last but not least, Sadia.
Mine's, what would it feel like to work in an organization where everyone was open about race?
Powerful. Yeah, that's a really powerful question to be asking yourself. Fantastic. Thank you all for attending today. A huge thank you to Claudia, Sadia and Marie, who you can find out more about on the Diverse Coach Directory, a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches from Black, Asian and minority backgrounds. And my colleague Snetta's putting the link in the chat. Feel free to get in touch with me for programs that advance the careers of your Black, Asian and ethnic minority leaders, as well as programs on topics like allyship that support majority group leaders also. And we will share the video and links that came from this session today. Our next event is on the 21st of September, and it's called Avoiding Burnout in the 24/7 Work Culture. So please do join us. Our final thought, our humanity is worth a little discomfort. It's actually worth a lot of discomfort. So embrace the discomfort, everyone. And that quote is from So You Want to Talk About Race. Look out for a email from us later today with a link to the video and also the resources we've discussed. Thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you once again, Claudia, Sadia, and Marie. If you could stay on for 1 second, it would be really great. And bye-bye to everyone else. Take care. Great. I just want to take a quick photo of all of us, if that's okay.